Environmental discrimination refers to the way some communities, often low-income, indigenous, and racialized groups, are more likely exposed to environmental hazards and pollution, as well as the reduced access to environmental benefits like clean water, air, and safe land. It is an important issue in physical geography because it shows how natural systems such as waterways, soil, and circulation interact with human development patterns and industrial development, often a concentrating risk in specific locations. It is also central to social justice because these patterns are not accidental. They are shaped by historical inequality, policy decisions, and economic power structures. A powerful real-world example of environmental discrimination is mercury contamination in the Grassy Narrows First Nations community in Ontario, Canada. In the 1960s and the 1970s, a nearby pulp and paper mill released large amounts of mercury into the English Wabigoon River system. This mercury entered the water, accumulated in fish, and became part of the diet of the Grassy Narrows people who relied heavily on fishing for food, culture, and livelihood. Over time, community members developed severe health effects known as Minamata disease, including tremors, loss of coordination, vision problems, and neurological damage. The contamination also disrupted traditional practices and the local economy itself.
So I'll be talking about the background and geographic context of Grassy Narrows. So basically, it's a small community in northwestern Ontario surrounded by forests, rivers, and lakes. The area has cold winters with lots of snow and warm summers. The English Wabigoon River system is an important water source used for fishing, travel, and daily life. The land around the community is rich in trees and fish, which support both local families and nearby industries in a closely connected bunch of communities. Because the river flows through so many areas, pollution can easily spread downstream. Most people living in Grassy Narrows are Indigenous members of the Netum Anishinaabeg First Nations. Many families depend on fishing, hunting, and trapping for food and income. The mercury poison problem started in the 1960s when a paper mill in Dryden dumped mercury waste into the river. The mercury polluted the water and built up in the fish that people ate regularly as part of their diet. Many residents became sick and suffered from shaking, numbness, trouble seeing, and problems with movement and balance. Even though the pollution was discovered many years ago, the effects are still felt today, and the communities continue to deal with the damage left behind.
All right, now we're going to talk about how this impacts the community. So the community is eating these fish, right? The big issue is that when you are consuming methylmercury, your body absorbs 95 to 100% of it. So they're getting all of this methylmercury that that has concentrated through the food chain. So it's really not good. And if you're wondering, well, how is this affecting them? Get ready. Okay, first of all, tremors, memory loss, headaches, cognitive and motor dysfunction, extreme neurological side effects, sometimes even death, low alcohol tolerance, higher susceptibility to infection, and in pregnant women, there is a high chance of birth defects and miscarriage. Beyond this, the prolonged mercury poisoning in the community has led to extreme cancer rates. 2 children in 2007 were born with brain cancer. So,
and this is not even like a few people that are experiencing this. 90% of Grassy Narrows is. Right. And since everyone's eating fish, because, we're by a river. Back in the 1960s and 1970s, the Dryden paper mill dumped estimated 9 tons of mercury into the water as a result of industrial waste. So this was dumped into the Wabigoon River, and at first glance, that's awful, right? That's a lot of mercury. But
not only is there 9 tons of mercury in this water, there's also a process which is occurring in this river, which is leading to a mass production of methylmercury, which is like a a more toxic version of mercury. And this happens because there's little microorganisms, little bacteria in the water that basically a process of their digestion or a process of their living is they produce methylmercury. So this process is also being sustained by continued dumping of waste, even if it's not mercury, because sulfates in the wastewater are feeding these organisms. So the organisms need mercury and sulfates, and now there's already so much mercury in the water from the 9 tons that were dumped, and now we have a bunch of other things coming in, a bunch of sulfates, which are just feeding them. And these bacteria are like bottom feeders, right? But there's a food chain in this Wabigoon River, right? So the crustaceans in this river are going to eat these bacteria, and since methylmercury is really bad for most organisms, we don't know how to digest that, right? So it just stays in them, and as the crustaceans are eaten by the fish, and then the fish are eaten by the bigger fish, this rate of methylmercury is just getting more and more concentrated because no one can digest it, right? So when the humans are eating these fish, it's an insane amount of mercury. And I know that you probably heard about tuna having mercury. This is so much worse, right? So not to mention that largely First Nations community, a big part of their cultural practice is
eating fish. So obviously they're going to eat the fish. Also, it's a massive resource. It's like if you're living right next to a river, you're going to eat the fish. But the fish is not good. So,
Crap, dude. Can you see that? 226.
So how is this racist though? Well, this was also the mid-1900s, where indigenous people were not treated equally. People who stayed on the grassy narrows were from the Ojibwe tribe, and basically, as many indigenous people were being treated poorly back then, they were also being sent to residential school, being paid a lot less than the average person, and they would also not be able to get any political power in the face of the Ontario government at the time. The government knew that the power imbalance was great. So when a lot of protests came up, a lot of issues arose in 1977, the Ontario government decided to just, we'll compensate them.
Fun coupons! See that? A fun coupon!
Right? That's it. Compensation. They didn't care to fix anything. They ignored all the scientific causes behind how this is just terrible for the people. Just all over the head. Even in 1984, the government was like, yo, the river's gonna clean itself. Right, because make it make sense. It took the Ojibwe people nearly half a decade to finally stand up and get their voice heard. Half a decade. If it was a richer Toronto neighborhood, boom, mercury poisoning, no more. But no, half a decade because they're weak people. Are we kidding? They've been fighting for hella years, by the way. It was just ignored because they're indigenous. As I mentioned before, the indigenous people's wages were a lot less than the average person's. Therefore, they didn't have any other options to go and get food. They couldn't go to the store and buy something because obviously that's way out of budget, especially when they have a river right there that's been in their tradition for over 100 years. It's sustainable, and it's literally what they're used to in their everyday life. Obviously, they're going to eat the fish from the river. So after a lot of them got poisoned, they began to bring in healthcare professionals to go help the indigenous people who ate the mercury fish and, started to get sick. However, they took forever to cure these people. They would, not intentionally, but they would delay the process of treatment, which means that a lot more people died. Overall, it was just something that could have been avoided. If they came from a wealthier Toronto neighborhood, it wouldn't have been a problem. None of this would have been a problem. It would have been solved right away. But just because they were indigenous, just because they were persecuted, this happened. Unfortunate.
Current status and efforts for change. Today, the community of Grassy Narrows continues to fight for justice through legal action, environmental activism, and demands for stronger government intervention. In 2024, the community filed a lawsuit against both the Ontario and federal governments, claiming they violated Treaty 3 rights by failing to properly clean the English Wabigoon River system and protect residents from mercury exposure. Community leaders such as Chief Rudy Turtle and local activists have organized protests, public awareness campaigns, and meetings with government officials to demand compensation, safer drinking water, better health care, and a full environmental cleanup. Environmental groups and Indigenous organizations have also supported Grassy Narrows by pressuring governments to stop nearby industrial development projects that could worsen the contamination. Some important progress has been made. In March 2025, construction began on the Grassy Narrows Mercury Care Home and Wellness Center, a specialized health facility funded by the federal government with over $80 million for construction and operations. The center will help provide long-term care, mental health support, traditional healing, and treatment for residents suffering from mercury poisoning and neurological disorders caused by methylmercury exposure. However, challenges are still occurring because mercury is trapped in the riverbed sediments of the English Wabigoon system more than 50 years after the dumping occurred. Cleanup is very difficult because the contamination is spread through a wide network of rivers and lakes in northwestern Ontario, where currents, seasonal flooding, and shifting sediments can re-release mercury back into the water. This means that fish continue to carry unsafe levels of methylmercury, directly affecting people who still rely on the river for traditional food. The remote location also shows cleanup efforts as access to many contaminated areas is limited and requires specialized equipment and long-term monitoring.
In conclusion, the mercury poisoning in Grassy Narrows shows how environmental discrimination is deeply connected to both geography and social inequality. Industrial pollution from the nearby paper mill caused mercury to enter the river system, where it built up in fish and severely impacted the Indigenous community who relied on the fish for food and their culture and survival. This led to long-term health conditions that majorly disrupted the daily life, and the situation was made worse by government inaction and unequal treatment, showing how Indigenous communities were not protected in the same way as more privileged areas. Even today, mercury remains in the environment and continues to affect the community despite ongoing efforts for cleanup and support. Overall, Grassy Narrows is a clear example of environmental injustice and shows why protecting both human rights and the environment is so important.